Hello, everybody. My name is Nick Allen. I'm an assistant editor at RogerEbert.com, and you are watching the Q&A for Zeros and Ones for the Unnamed Footage Festival. And we have here writer-director Supreme Eugene Kotlyarenko joining us.
Hello. Hello, everyone watching. And I assume they're all watching kind of at home, right? This is not a
Yeah,
physical event. This is a COVID-safe event. So you are watching at home, probably on a projector or a TV or maybe even a computer.
right.
So that's an interesting movie to have watched on a computer, I think.
Well, that was kind of my first thought was when you were making it, we weren't really at the time of video streaming on TVs and so forth, and we weren't even really at kind of computer streaming either. Were you thinking like theatrical presentation originally for this movie, or were you thinking
Well, I mean,
we'd be watching at computers?
yeah, it was pre like, yeah, Netflix streaming,
Right.
like Hulu streaming or whatever. Um, I definitely wanted it to be in theaters. I mean, all my films, regardless of their sort of aesthetic or conceptual, like, sort of grammar, visual grammar, I like them all to be in theaters.
Right.
That's the ideal experience, obviously, of just, it's big, it's quiet, it's, in that you're not distracted by other shit. You're in the dark, you're immersed. So
Right.
yeah, that's the ideal viewing experience for, any film in my mind. But that being said, Zeros and Ones is like a maximalist film. There's a lot of shit going on. There's a lot of stuff to look at. And so I guess the other good alternative would be if someone like owned it on DVD, which doesn't exist, or owned, a file, which I think actually this film is like unavailable. So whoever has watched it at this film festival, you're lucky. Um, but you could stop it and kind of like take it all in.
Yeah.
Is another way to watch it, which is not what happened just right now. So whatever. Um, anyway, yeah, I don't know. However people want to watch it. I guess at this point you have to watch either at a film festival or illegally.
Well, it's on iTunes.
Is it on iTunes?
Yeah, I've been watching it on iTunes, and I've been watching it as like half
Oh,
of
okay.
the screen sometimes to get the.
Who's making money off it? I think
I
there's
hope you
something
are.
illegal going on. It being on iTunes, I think there's something illegal going on, and
Oh man.
I am going to get to the bottom of this at some point, and I will start owning the movie again because I
Right.
really do, and someone else's probably. Anyway, yeah, I don't know. We did show it in a movie theater. Eventually it premiered at the Maryland Film Festival, which is my first time ever going to a film festival, and that was, and I think still is, like a really great film festival, just like a top tier film festival. It's kind of like the alternative for East Coast people to go, instead of going to like Toronto or the New York Film Festival, they go to Maryland.
Mhm.
If you made a certain type of movie with certain budget level, with certain non-star level, um, and then it played in New York for a week at like a weird little movie theater that was in the back of a restaurant. It was called the Rerun Theater and was programmed by a guy named Aaron Hillis, who is kind of a well-known programmer in the festival scene. And I did a Q&A with Brandon Harris, who is a film writer and a writer who's now an exec at Amazon. So,
Wow.
and it was cool. It was like my first, whatever. I made the movie when started making the movie when I was 21.
Right.
And we finished when I was 24. So it took 3 years to make. And it was just amazing to meet other people who made festivals, made movies, who liked movies. Because in LA, I didn't meet anyone who liked movies. I met people who made movies, but
Right.
they didn't seem to know anything about movies, and they certainly didn't seem to care about movies. Long answer to
No, no, no.
whatever. Yeah.
Because I was thinking, well, you mentioned in the on the podcast for the Unnamed Footage Film Festival that when you were starting this project, you kind of wanted to, you had a new or wanted to invent a new language of cinema, which I think is a very good 20-something statement, but also honest to what this movie does. So I was just kind of wondering, like, what were you thinking when you started this project?
Okay, so I made a short movie when I was 19 called Zeros and Ones, which explored some similar ideas in terms of multiple cameras simultaneously, a split screening which involved overlays rather than just, you know, like instead of like a De Palma style split screen, it was a little bit closer to like Peter Greenaway, Prospero's books, Pillow Book type split screening, you know, overlays. And it had text on screen. It had people going through their phones, very crude graphics. And it was about interconnectivity. It was like a kind of La Ronde style film that went from character to character to character, all connected through some sort of social media-esque connection. So the idea was on my mind for a while. And then I moved to LA 2 years later, and I was just whatever. I just eventually got some jobs and was working in like porn adjacent industry. And I was working with Zalman King, who made like Red Shoe Diaries and produced 9.5 Weeks and stuff. And I had worked for Agnes Varda. She's actually the one who got me that job. And eventually I was just like, I don't know. I was like, I moved to LA to like change cinema. Like, and I worked with Agnes, and now I'm here like editing like weird, sexy interviews and stuff. And I was like, I just have to do this, right? And I was just like, I'm gonna, you know, like try to Godard it. I'm gonna try to, you know, people I was thinking of were filmmakers that had a lot of issues with, like Antonioni, Godard, you know, Bellatar, like people who did very radical formal things that weren't necessarily like my thing. But I was like, I'll just do my thing, which is kind of like a maximalist thing. Although I think you could argue that in some levels Godard is a maximalist too. And so yeah, so I just wanted to grapple with the idea that we were all on our computers so much, and it was you know, a different type of screen medium that we were using to process our communication with the world and kind of our understanding of what was happening in the world. And consequently, you know, you think narrative, right? So like how is the natural processing language that we use when we use a computer, how can I then employ that to make a cinematic narrative? That was the big idea.
So why the mystery angle, or when did that kind of come into play that you would base this formatting idea around a missing laptop?
Yeah, I just wanted thematically it to have something to do with like the computer, you know. And I do think this is probably to me like the main weakness of the film, and you know, that there isn't like it's well, one, you know, I kind of solved that with Spree. In that is Spree, there's a rationale. Spree's a movie I just made about a live streamer who goes on a murderous rampage, and he live streams what he's doing. And that there's a rationale for the justification of the presentation because he is a live streamer. It's all natural to these user interfaces and to these applications. And actually at the same time, because zeros and ones had become such an arduous process to finish, and it was very collaborative, and there were a lot of people involved and a lot of complicated elements involved, I made a screen capture film called Skydiver, which was, you know, didn't involve any graphic design. Like all of zeros and ones is graphic design. It's animated. Every single app, scene, game, whatever is from scratch, made by really talented animators and designers. And Skydiver is just like this. It's like if you screen grab this conversation with, and you have the entire desktop on there, and it is, you know, on some levels a little closer to the movies that came out a few years later, like Unfriended, which is just a screen capture. But anyway, Unfriended, something that was a screen capture like Skydiver, like Unfriended, is a little bit more natural to what you would expect from a screen movie, whereas zeros and ones is almost like, and I think they said it on the podcast, and it was quite interesting to me. It was like a metaphorical kind of metaphysical thing, where you know the story was related to the visuals, right? The story was thematized to the computer screen, in that he lost his computer, but it was not necessarily the telling of the tale was not dependent on that visualization, right? Like the tale does not live inside the visualization. So the visualization is like a metaphor for the world that he finds himself in, which is a distant world, which is a world that is confusing and overwhelming and ugly and stupid, and everyone is basically, alienated and, yeah.
In the scripting process, are all the websites kind of laid out essentially, or
No, very few,
okay.
very few, which is why it took a long time. I would say the sequence that was best preconceptualized, the most fully preconceptualized, was the high school reunion party.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we knew going into it that we wanted to make it like AOL, because I was like, well, what would you do if you wanted to like visualize a reunion to something from, whatever, the early 2000s, late 90s? It's like, oh, you would do it like AOL.
Mm-hmm.
And so, entering the party is the login, and then going through it, you see the buddy list with the away messages, and then your interactions are like a chat room and like instant messaging between people. And then when it all gets fucked, your system's crashing or whatever, right, and it gets buffered. And so that was well conceived, and really very few other things were conceived. And I was very naive in thinking what it would take to come up with all these different looks and have it make a sort of emotional sense, as you move through, because there's not like a Dante's Inferno type logic where it like gets worse and worse. Although there is a certain sort of like reversion to, like, by the end of the movie, you're doing a sort of like data like cleaning of like the system. Like, there become more system problems in the third act of the film as opposed to the second act of the film, which is very much just like, here's a web page, here's an app, here's a game. It's kind of more like you're going through like the daily muck of the internet in that second act of
Did you have to set any kind of guidelines, or was there ever a question about like this? I know you're a maximalist, and that's amazing, but is there ever a point where it's like there's too much going on screen?
No. Okay, so we have basically, I would say, close to, over the course of the entire film, 50 volunteers who worked on it.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who were animating the film the longest, they almost like owned a scene, right? So there'd be someone who would do the Doom game, and there was someone else who did the waking up at Norm's house with like the infinity thing, and there was someone who was responsible for like the kind of Super Mario world when Pong goes at the lake and whatever. So people were responsible kind of for their own scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And in that way, they brought, even though we discussed like what the idea of the scene was, they brought their own kind of aesthetic sensibilities to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of encouraged that. And then once we kind of had settled on what the aesthetic of each scene was, then it was my responsibility with them to be like, okay, how do we make this clear? How do we make this funny? And how do we make sure that the timing of the humor and the information within the performance, within what we filmed like a year ago or somewhere 2 years ago, is elucidated and amplified by what we're doing visually in the scene. And we did like 10, 15, sometimes 15, sometimes 50, I was going to say, versions of a single scene. Wow. In terms of the timing of the scrolling up, or like, what would be brighter than what else, or what would have text coming, because there are ways to control people's information. Color, framing, and motion are ways to guide people's eyes to certain things at certain times. And we were definitely very sensitive to that. And, so that I never thought anything could be too overwhelming. I just thought, okay, we need to make sure that we are consciously controlling where people are looking at certain times. And sound too. Sound design is a big part of that as well. So
there's definitely like as a through line of like, they're going to look at this corner of the screen, this corner of the screen, and yeah, very more than a usual film, essentially.
Yeah, I think most filmmakers are sensitive to that, but it's different than like a usual film because, yeah, you put someone's face in the middle of a frame, and that's probably what most people are going to look at. their eyes or their mouth or whatever.
Right.
And in this film, you have embedded videos, right? It's rare. There's nothing really in the film that's like, oh, here's a close up of someone, or here's even like a medium shot of someone.
Right.
It's mostly embedded videos, and so it was about directing people with lines and color and kind of kind of like weird Renaissance techniques, really.
Right.
Yeah.
And it requires so much detail too, and that's something that's a through line. I mean, with Spree, obviously, is like the amount of time you invest in minutia. But
Mm-hmm.
what to you is like kind of rewarding or fun about that?
It's just like, one, you want like a certain sense of like authenticity, even if you are creating like apps or world from scratch. Like, the other ones are world like kind of from scratch, but it has a certain parodic or satirical relationship to the source material. So that's funny, and that's a fun way of making a commentary on the things that we're all kind of used to, and pointing out what's like stupid or silly or ugly about them. And so it has a certain type of authenticity. On another level, I do, not like on a conspiracy theory level, but I do think we are consuming all of this information throughout our days, almost to a psychotic extent, especially with our phones now, which we carry around everywhere, and which we look at any free moment we have with our minds. And there just has to be a way for film to comment on all the stuff that we're processing. And I think when you see it in the context of a narrative, divorced from your sort of casual, quote unquote, casual usage, even though the usage is so frequent and so psychotic, it allows you to really see how inundated we are with stimulation and data and distraction.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's just about getting that stuff right. And also just in general, as film viewers, I think we like Easter eggs. I
Right.
think we like piecing together all of the visual details of a puzzle. I don't really know that the answer to like where James Pongo's computer is buried deep within zeros and ones. Maybe it is.
Is
You
it?
know, you have to rewatch it, I guess.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
Where, where does the idea of the game kind of come from then, in terms of
The game,
yeah,
like,
yeah, it's
you
very,
just lost the game. I just
I just
lost the
lost
game.
it, right? But I mean, it's got to be something.
I just thought it was a really interesting, like, like philosophical concept of, if you think of this thing, if you think about the game, you lose the game. I just felt like that had something to do with our relationship with computers and
Right.
with eventually what became, I think, social media and smartphones. Is the second you interact with the thing, you have lost.
Right.
It's like this kind of, it's a web in the worst possible way. You're stuck in a web. And yeah, I just thought it was really cool. It's something a friend had introduced to me a few years earlier, and I was like, wow, that's a really cool thing to put into a movie, because then it becomes like an infection in the viewer's mind. We had even more references to it in an earlier cut, and some of those scenes had to go for pacing purposes. But I wish the movie had triggered the game more and more. Like, I think there's only maybe 2 or 3 mentions of it in the final cut, in the final film. But really, it would have been cool if there were just like pop-ups throughout the film
Right.
that had something to do, that triggered the game in the viewer. That would have been more satisfying. This is probably why my movie didn't change the world, because I didn't really maximize on its full potential. But something I thought about also was like, do you remember like in last year at Marienbad, they play like the weird matchstick game? And I was like, it's just always cool in a movie when they introduce like something and you're like, huh, how does that work? Or like, oh, that's interesting. And then like people, when this movie in my mind could become like a hit, or like a lot of people would watch it, I was like, oh, everyone will start playing the game, and like my movie will have originated it, which is not what happened. But
It flashes, very aggressively, every now and then.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. So it does happen. I haven't seen the movie in years.
Oh,
It
shit,
does.
you haven't?
No.
No, it's a hell of a movie, man.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. I was pretty ashamed of it for a long time, because it didn't do anything. It didn't fulfill any of my ambitions or hopes for changing cinema or influencing cinema. And then I was really sad when Unfriended came out, because one of the VFX artist on Zeros and Ones was the VFX supervisor on Unfriended. One of the people an editor who I worked with on several projects was the editor of Unfriended. And I was like, I wasn't upset with them that they're my collaborators, but they're clearly very familiar with this like kind of language that I was exploring early on. And then they kind of were able to, with Basilevs and stuff, make a commercially successful version of this thing that I was very interested in. And I was upset with myself for not having like done it, quote unquote, the right way, right? Which is a genre film that, you could market as like horror or as genre, and then people would be interested, as opposed to this film is kind of like an Odyssey film. It's comedic, but you can't say this is this genre. You just say it's, like a sort of, I don't even know what you would call it, like a nihilistic, like Odyssey, like kind of After Hours type movie or something like that. Comedy. So, but yeah, it does seem like in the last like 2 years or so, it's found a kind of mild revival. Like I think they've shown it in Australia like 5 times. Like it's a very, very popular with a certain like Australian cineast audience.
Yeah, what is your thought about it now, especially when there have been so many screen-like movies and that you kind of
I don't know, like I hope it just keeps getting shown, and people, it's barely a cult movie, so hopefully it'll become more of a cult movie and people can see it and understand like kind of how innovative it was, and hopefully if they find it funny or enjoyable, watch it. I mean, I hope it gets spread around. Like, there's all sorts of movies that I discover and personally that I find that, didn't make any impact when they were released, but I'm like, oh my God, this is like a great fucking movie.
Right.
And I want to tell all my friends about it. I'm going to email them this like upload link I have or whatever of it. So my thoughts about it are just, I hope people keep discovering it and watching it and, writing about it and talking about it. But I don't know. I haven't seen, I don't, even there was like a Q&A we did in Australia like a while ago, and I just tuned into the tail end, and I was just, I just see all the problems and stuff with it. And not just in terms of the visuals, but in terms of me as a director, in terms of directing actors and stuff. Just a lot of things that now I would do differently, which weirdly, like Spree was like my chance to kind of like, do it again.
Right.
In a different way, because Spree's like the update, right? Spree's about phones and live streaming, and it's very it's very end of the decade, and I think Zeros and Ones is very end of the last decade. Zeros and Ones is very much like a summation of the 2000s in terms of like the language of screens and desktops and our computer lives, and Spree is very much a summation of the 20 teens in terms of our social media and smartphone lives. And I'm sure in 2030, I'll have another flick about our VR. I mean, I already made my VR movie actually called VR, which is available at www.weare.fyi. You can check that out. But whatever, I'm sure I will still be grappling with the way our lives are now mediated by technology, very explicitly mediated by screens and by video technology. And I think there will probably be something that I'll be interested in soon enough that can be part of this project of thinking about cinematic grammar and storytelling through these other modes of audio-visual communication that we naturally use.
Right.
That's I guess one of my big projects.
Are you working on anything right now?
Yeah, I'm working on something that's not like that, which is a movie about the origins of coronavirus.
Really?
Yeah, that's what I'm writing right now.
Oh, shit. Wow. Okay. That sounds
It,
pretty
it's a it, it's a comedy. No, I
cool.
mean it's not really. It's like the Davinci Code,
Okay.
which is not a comedy. It's like the Davinci Code filtered through my sensibility.
Okay.
It's actually much closer to the third series, the third film in the Robert Langdon series called Inferno, which was a huge flop
Yeah.
because it was released a few days before the 2016 presidential election. Um, and so no one was interested in seeing the great Robert Langdon solve another art historical, decode another great art historical mystery. But I recommend all the films of the Da Vinci Code series.
Make sure you have some flagellation in there, right?
What'd you say? Yeah,
Flagellation.
yeah. Well, that's in the first one, self-flagellation. The
Right.
third one actually weirdly has to do with the virus and stuff. So it's pretty interesting stuff. Pretty interesting
Wow.
stuff. And it's actually also the most expressionistic. It's the one where Ron Howard veers the closest to like his version of like a De Palma film or something. And I think people will definitely at some point in the 2020s
Yeah.
make a case for Ron Howard, the auteur.
Jesus.
Although my co-writer on this film is like, he is such a hack. He's like a workman, like get paid director.
Right.
I say, listen, buddy, with the exception of Solo, a Star Wars story, the
Yes.
last like 10, 15 Ron Howard movies, he has been the producer and the director. And to
Right.
me, that, by that nature, if you're choosing your own projects, something is drawing you to them. You somehow are on tour. Anyway, I'm not gonna actually make the case for Ron, but I will say that I find all the Robert Langdon movies to be good.
Inspiring.
To be good.
I'm glad you're inspired by Robert Langdon then for the next.
Well, I think people like shit like that, and I think, like, I don't know if this worked in Zeros and Ones, and I don't know if this worked in Spree, but one thing people like is they like to watch a movie and they like to feel like because they're watching it, they're suddenly smart.
Right.
Because they're solving things along with the character, they're suddenly geniuses too.
Mm-hmm.
And like, that sort of vicarious empowerment of a viewer through a character is a big part of the cinema. And that's why those movies work. You're like, I'm suddenly smart. I suddenly know about, Italian art or the history of the Vatican or whatever it is. You suddenly learn things, but in a thrilling way.
I should let you go real fast, but my last kind of question is about that. Like, where does your sense of audience and understanding audience come from, you think?
Well, I think you have to just like know what you like as a filmmaker and what you respond to. I think the key is just to watch a lot of movies and to, and if you watch a lot of movies, you kind of naturally get a sense for like what is story structure, what is character, what is pacing, and for yourself, like what you like, and then you kind of just have to make a movie that you like, that you really haven't. And my motivation is that I want to make things that I really haven't seen before, that don't exist. Like I think that's really missing from most cinema, right? Most cinema is pretty derivative. So I just want to make things that really don't exist, that feel new. And then when you're actually making the thing and you're editing it, especially, and you just have to say like, do I like this? Am I excited? Is this making me laugh? And then you can do some test screenings. I always do test screenings just to get a sense of things in case anything is really confusing, not to figure out whether something, that always gets laughs, or people are always tense there, or no one's tense here. We need to fix that. That's hard because in test screenings, everyone has their own opinions and they think they're the filmmaker suddenly and blah, blah, blah. But if everyone is confused about a certain point, that's when a test screening is useful. But in general, I think you have to trust your own instincts and say, this is making me laugh. This is tense. This is not boring to me, even though I've seen it 50 times. So I'm going to go with that. So that's, in terms of like, who is an audience for films? I don't know. Most people watch WandaVision or something. Like, I don't know what that is, but most people are watching WandaVision these days. And, you know, I didn't make WandaVision and I'm not planning to make WandaVision, although I'm not necessarily averse to a series. It just has a totally different DNA and totally different storytelling rhythm than what I specialize in. So, you know, I don't know where the audience is, but, you know, you just keep making it. And like, I'm living in a studio apartment. Like, you know, I don't have any delusions about being some fucking decadent 70s or even 90s, like superstar filmmaker in a mansion or whatever. Is, I think, as long as I can, you know, eat food and pay my bills and stuff and make movies, then I am happy and lucky and privileged. So I'm just going to keep making movies. Yeah,
I mean, it's always struck me how you're such a maximalist, but you're making, you know, indies in a lot of regards, but you're also really trying to entertain people. You're a true entertainer.
I think so.
More than a lot of your peers and other people, you know, they would, with similar budgets and so forth. I think that's like a very interesting kind of clash about you.
Thanks, I appreciate that. I do think that it's hard to. It makes it hard for people who are like, you know, like intellectuals of the cinema to do it. No, because here's the deal. I'm trying to advance film language and kind of have a dialogue with like the history of cinema. So I'm doing aesthetic and conceptual things that I think are new, but it's also like my primary concern to entertain an audience. And not really, I don't really want to challenge people too much when they're watching a movie. I want them to just get immersed in the flow of the film rather than to have them sit there thinking about what something means or thinking about a visual or aesthetic decision. I don't want them thinking about it. I want them thinking about it later, but during the film, I don't want someone's mind wandering into interpretation. You know, wandering. I mean, you can interpret things as you go, but it just still suck you in. So I think that makes it hard for a lot of the festival circuit and a lot of the sort of more elevated film critics and film writers to even engage with my work, because they don't watch films like a normal audience. They want films that actually pose questions about like what you're watching as you're watching it, so that they can have something to write about. Because if they were, you know, enjoying the movie and entertained by the movie, they wouldn't even know how to fucking write about it. They would need 20 years of distance from a movie like that, like Showgirls or like, you know, Starship Troopers. I'm thinking Verhoeven because it happened to him a lot. They would need distance from those movies to understand those movies as philosophically or conceptually interesting, because they don't know how to process entertainment.
Right. So does that provide any comfort then about zeros and ones? I mean, we've talked about the kind of reception wasn't as great, but there is a sense of people embracing that, those kind of things.
Maybe, except, you know, Showgirls and Starship Troopers were released as major mainstream motion pictures that had, there's a certain level of base awareness that everyone had about them. And so you can revisit them. Zeros and Ones was beyond under the radar. So it takes like real specialists and champions to kind of revive it. It's really like a lost movie. So it takes a festival like this to reintroduce it to people so that it can become part of the discourse. But yeah, I'm hopeful. You know, I think if the bigger movies I make, the more people will be interested in my earlier work. So I'm hopeful.
Me too. Thank you, Eugene, for talking.
Thanks very much, Nick. Appreciate it. Yeah. Thanks everyone for watching. I guess for coming in your own house and watching. It was really fun talking to you.
See you guys later. Bye.
Bye.